And we move from Gerald Sutton to our friend, retired Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Colonel North, you heard Gerald Sutton, and there is a distinction between soldiers in a combat theater having a right to complain and someone having a political banner or carrying a personal torch for the other side. As you take a look at this and how it's unfolded, any insights given the fact that you led men into battle in Vietnam? You look at this and hear about what Gerald Sutton is calling a betrayal of trust. What is it like to go into combat? Can you understand what young Mr. Sutton was telling us?
Well, I blessedly didn't have to go into combat with an administration. Remember, Lyndon Baines Johnson sent me to war as a young second lieutenant, and Richard Nixon brought me home from that war. Now, thankfully, I didn't have to go in with a president who described victory as being, I'm just going to get the hell out and run. In other words, declare defeat in advance, tell the enemy when it's going to happen. That did not happen with at least my era of Vietnam, which is 1968, 69, and 70. So that's number one. Number two, when it comes to, quote, aiding and abetting the enemy, because that is the actual crime, there were many cases of people who signed on to, quote, confessions who were held under torture by the North Vietnamese, okay? The heroes that came out of that, with a handful of those who, either by virtue of sheer courage and tenacity, refused to sign on and were beaten brutally, and others who simply said, I'm going to stop this by signing on that I'm a, quote, war criminal. There were very, very few prosecutions that came out of that, and understandably so. Now, I don't know the full conditions under which Bergdahl was treated. I've seen what purports to be an email that he'd sent to his parents before he walked off his post, or at least before he found himself in the hands of, not the Taliban, by the way. This has nothing to do with the Taliban. The people with whom he found himself moments after he was outside the compound at that forward operating base were not Taliban. He was basically made a hostage by the Haqqani Network, which is a criminal enterprise which practices terrorism routinely and has for decades in that part of the world, on both sides of the Afghan-Pakistani border. So the Haqqani Network has done all manner of terrible things. We also know well that the Haqqanis are in it for the money. They could give a flip about guys being held down in Gitmo or anywhere else. You notice one of their very senior Haqqani reps, who was a relative, is still a prisoner in Bagram prison, right? So, and he's now under the control of the Afghan government. He's not on the list. The list is compiled by people who have very little, if any, peripheral connection to the Haqqanis. And the so-called Quetta Shura, which controls a lot of things, bad things that happen out in the AFPAC area, are the ones who benefited with 5 people who we now describe as prisoners of war. It's the first time I've heard them described as that. Up until now, JD, they were called enemy combatants, detained on the battlefield because they tried to kill, or they did kill, Americans and our allies in the coalition forces.
And that is an important distinction you're making here between prisoners of war and what we observe in terms of the Geneva Convention and enemy combatants. But the question, we have about a minute and a half remaining, Colonel North. 5 top Taliban leaders for this one American who his background dubious, to say the least, listening to some of those who went into war with him. Was this the right trade to make?
No, and that's what I'm saying, JD. Somebody needs to ask the question of this administration. Was there a ransom? I'm talking about a fiscal, financial, money transaction in this. All of these events begin the same way. A transaction of some kind, proof of life, and then verification that the people you're talking to can actually deliver. I've been there, done that more times than I care to talk about, and the world knows it. Okay, bottom line of it is, those conditions are all dependent on real intelligence. And what you found happening today was the designation, what took place on Saturday, the designation of 5 people in Gitmo who had nothing to do with this transaction. Was there a ransom paid? Did the government of the United States, either directly or indirectly, finance a terrorist organization that is a criminal enterprise, meaning the economies? Because that's all they've ever cared about up till now.
Colonel North, you are asking a compelling question. It merits our continued vigilance. As always, Oliver North, we thank you for your insights here on America's Forum. So, a soldier is coming home, but a Marine is stuck in Mexico. His story and the congressman who visited him coming up next on America's Forum.